Well, I'm going to focus on a particular area of the change of the role of state societies and markets, which isn't often covered in international development, which is the aid regimes that have emerged in the last 50 years, in particular from the Middle East. I'm in particular concerned about the Saudi Arabian aid regime, which has its own markets, its own social networks through which this aid is disseminated. Some of it is state, some of it is not. These don't necessarily feature in international aid architecture, but they are playing an increasingly prominent role across state, society and market divides, and we know very little about them. Well, I think despite the fact that we thought that there would be a reduced role for the state in addressing issues of inequality and security and so forth, and these would be matters that would have to be addressed globally, I think what we are seeing is that states still matter, and they matter tremendously. And I think there's a very strong case to be made for addressing inequalities through state policies, in particular welfare policies. There is a case to be made for looking at security in a more comprehensive way that looks at human security, that looks at the safety needs of those living in the most vulnerable situations, but also a need for transnational activism, in particular on issues of migration, displacement and so forth. I think we also see that we thought that the era of protests and unruly politics ended in the 1960s, but now we see a multitude of forms of organized and non-organized forms of social action emanating from societies. Some of it is cross-border, some of it is local, some of it is national, but I think that is going to be increasingly important in challenging inequalities and exposing injustices across the board. IDS has a number of very important roles to play in reconfiguring international development. I think the first and primary one is the role that it has so successfully played in creating safe spaces where people come together to share ideas. And this sounds small, but it actually has a huge ripple effect across communities, across societies. And I think that power to convene, to bring together, to challenge, to engage in collective brainstorming and thinking is an incredibly important one. The second is to challenge Western hegemonic knowledge production. The curricula we teach, the approaches we engage with, the frameworks we still work with are still primarily produced in the West. And the idea is not to just challenge anything that comes from the West, but to try and pluralize the sources, to try and democratize the reference base from which we engage. And I think IDS is particularly well positioned to engage with that because of the multitude of partners it has across various continents.